Corey, I'm the interpretive specialist here, so I'll be doing your tour. And before we go down, I'd like to sort of give you a little background on the history of the place, discovery of the cave, foundation of the park, all that good stuff. So who here knows what the cave is called? What's the name of the cave? Gardner Cave, that's right. So that's named after Ed Garner. He was the man who discovered the cave in about 1899. And Ed was your typical pioneer type fella. He came out here from the Midwest in the late 19th century, and he built himself a one-room shack down by Boundary Dam. Have any of you been to Boundary Dam before?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so his shack was sort of where the parking lot is today. Now, I know what you're thinking. There's a shack down there.
There is another shack down there.
That is not the same shack, but the same general area. So you can just kind of pretend like that was Ed's shack, I guess. And so that's where he was living. Back then, you could not homestead yet. That wasn't available until 1912 when they finally surveyed the land. And so people would just move out here, find a good piece that they liked, and sort of set up shop and then claim squatting rights afterwards. So that's what Ed was doing. That's what most people did back then. And, you know, it was kind of a tough life. You had to live on the frontier. You had to do a bunch of different things to survive. So Ed, he did a little bit of logging, worked as a mechanic from time to time, did all his own hunting and fishing, that sort of stuff. But mostly people knew him as the local moonshiner and bootlegger for the area. He was the go-to guy for that whiskey. I've read a lot of old interviews from people from like the 1950s and stuff, people whose parents knew Ed, and they said a bunch of different things. Some of them say that he was a smuggler who was bringing like Canadian whiskey over the border and selling it to the logging camps in the area. Other people say he had his own stills out here. He was making his own sort of moonshine. And some people say he did a bit of both, but regardless of exactly how he was splitting up his activities, he was definitely involved in one way or another in the bootlegging trade. That was like his main occupation. And so he was out here one day in the woods. Maybe he was on a hunting trip. Maybe he was checking his stills. We're not really sure. I like to think that maybe he had a couple drinks and he was just kind of walking around the woods. He was known to do that from time to time. And he just sort of fell into a hole and discovered the cave that way. So I'm not sure if that was the hole that he fell into, because that's a very deep hole, and his nickname was Shorty, so he wasn't a very tall guy. But if you look behind me, you'll see that little dip in the trail, and that dip is called a sink. There's a bunch of different sinks kind of around the property. There's actually a very large one down by the parking lot, and those are like old entrances to the cave that have been filled up by debris over the years and sort of closed off. And so the idea is that maybe he rode his horse over one of those or just kind of stumbled in and discovered the cave. So he tried to keep it a secret. You know, he kind of wanted to keep it to himself. It's a good place to hide stuff from the sheriff down there. It's also like 39 degrees, so it's like a refrigerator. I've been keeping my eye out for a bottle of 120-year-old whiskey. Still haven't found it yet. Sometimes I threaten to send small children down the crevices to get a better look for me. But anyway, he's trying to keep it a secret. The word gets out after a while, though. By 1903 or 04, you start to see newspaper articles pop up about the cave, so people are kind of talking about it at that point. And Ed was trying to hang on to the property. He saw some profitability in it. There's some evidence that he was taking private tours down there in the early days for a little extra dough. In the end, he wasn't able to hang on to it for too long, though. Most people around here will tell you that he lost the cave in a poker game. That's kind of the local legend. And that was to a man named William Crawford, who was a businessman in town. And I'm sure that those two played a lot of poker. There wasn't a lot of people around here back then, and so I'm sure everyone knew each other and they sort of recreated like that. But that's not exactly how the land came into Crawford's hands. I think that's just a fun story that people like to tell. Really, we know that Crawford got the land in a federal land grant in 1921. And since he was a businessman, he came out here and logged the place. And then he turned around and sort of just donated it back to the state, thinking that maybe he could get the railroad up here a little more often if there was enough public interest with the cave. Maybe help grow the towns a bit, stimulate his businesses, that sort of thing. So it officially became a park in 1922. Between the 20s and the 50s, there wasn't much going on here, though. It was sort of a park in name only. People would come out here with matches and candles and ropes, and they'd sort of do their own exploring. And we'll see a bunch of vandalism and like damage to some of the limestone from those early days that I'll point out. But that's just kind of how it was. It was sort of a free-for-all. And in the 50s, they put in a little bit of infrastructure, some wooden stairs and a lighting system, but none of that worked very good at all. The wooden stairs, if you've ever worked with wood before, you know they don't do very well in moisture. And so all the moisture from the cave would kind of rot them out, make them fall apart. The lighting system was even more unreliable. Whenever it failed, it would just plunge everybody into darkness. So not very good infrastructure out here at that time. Finally, in 1977, they put in metal stairs and platforms and a new lighting system, and that lighting system hasn't failed on me once. Yeah. And I think they updated everything in the 90s. So that's the basic infrastructure we'll see today. And that's kind of my wrap up on the history of the place. And before we go in, what I like to do is look at everybody's feet. I know it's a little weird, but I'm just checking out your shoes. It looks like everyone's got pretty good shoes today. Just regardless of that, be careful, kind of take it slow. Everything's pretty slippery and wet down there, a lot of slick rocks, that sort of thing. And the closest hospital is all the way in Colville, and that's not very close at all. So we'd like to avoid any injuries today, any medical emergencies, so be very conscious of your footing. The biggest rule, though, most important thing to note is that when we're in the cave, you cannot touch the rocks. You can especially not touch the limestone. Limestone's really, really sensitive to the oil on our skin. And when you touch the limestone formation, it actually stops growing forever in the place that you touched it. So be very conscious of that, conscious of your hands and your feet as we go through. And we'll go ahead and head in. Whoever comes in last, if you could do me a big favor and just shut the gate behind you and then dummy.
All right. And I see what they're saying about the smell.
Yeah.
It does kind of have a marijuana smell.
We've got a larger group, so be sure to kind of scoot down next to the people in front of you. We're going to stand close to some strangers today and get to know each other pretty well.
Find a good spot, don't just, yeah, right there.
So how much of this is limestone?
Most
Most?
of what we see is limestone. If you look up at the ceiling, you might see a little bit of that black rock. That is thought to be Leadbetter slate, like up there.
Yeah.
You'll see a lot of that on the ceiling as well as we go.
So how does the limestone grow?
Oh, well, now that everyone's in the cave, I can start my little spiel. So the first thing that I like to ask is, are there any geologists with us today? No?
Fabricate away.
Okay. So he's on to me. Yeah, what I like to say is, since there's no geologist, you can just take everything I say as absolute fact from here on out. All right, so this is a limestone cave. And limestone's a pretty interesting mineral because it's made from old organic material. We're talking about seashells and things like that mostly. And so when I heard that, I got to thinking, like, where did all the seashells come from? We're pretty far from the ocean right now. We're in the middle of the Selkirk Mountains, so what's the deal? And so to answer that, you got to go back about 500 million years ago. Back then, the North American continent ended to the east of where we are today, sort of where the Pondere River is right now. And this was all continental shelf, which was underneath the ocean at the time. And so in that ocean, there's a bunch of fish swimming around. They die, and their shells and their bones kind of sink to the bottom. And all that pressure on top of them from the water sort of presses down and decomposes them, turns them into like a limestone ooze. And that ooze slowly lithifies, turns into rock over millions of years. And then you got all this limestone on the ocean floor. So you fast forward a few 100 million years from there. At that point, North America is starting to drift west. It's drifting away from Africa and Europe, and it's starting to collide with the Pacific plate, which is sort of sliding underneath the continent, and it's uplifting all that old continental shelf to make the mountains that we're in today. And as the mountains pop up, so does the limestone. Millions of more years of erosion and glaciers and things, they sort of erode away the mountains and expose the limestone. and that sort of sets the stage for the development of the cave. Now, when we think about limestone caves, we think about all the cool formations that we learned about in school, right? Those stalagmites and stalactites and all that good stuff. And everything that grows in here grows because of the way that rainwater interacts with the limestone itself. So if you look up at the ceiling, you're going to see all these roots coming through from the plants above us. And I think there's some over here by me too. And that's a really good indication about how water can move from the surface and down into the cave over time. And there's just a lot of chemistry taking place as that happens. So as the water moves through the soil, it picks up carbon dioxide. That makes the water lightly acidic. That acidic water drips down onto the limestone and slowly dissolves it away, and then it moves it to different parts of the cave. So when you have all this water with dissolved limestone in it, when that water drips or splashes or goes over a rough piece of rock, it leaves behind a little bit of mineral. And the mineral that it's leaving behind is called calcite. So this little white nub behind me, I like to think of it as the cave's uvula, that little dangly thing in the back of your throat. So I tell people to be careful as they walk by. If you get too close, the cave might vomit us all out. You never know. But that's a good example of a calcite deposit. Calcite and limestone are the same thing. They're both calcium carbonate. But the calcite has a little less impurities in it. Some of those impurities get taken out during the dissolving process. And so those make all the cool formations that we're talking about. I'll take you back to your 4th grade geology class. The formations that hang down from the ceiling like icicles that grow from the dripping water. Do we remember what those are called? Stalactites, that's right. Good way to remember that is they're hanging on tight, yeah, to the ceiling. And then you have what growing up from the ground, from the splashing water? Stalagmites. You can remember that because you might trip over them if you're not paying attention.
And they might reach the top.
That also, I like that you might trip over them because it reminds people to take it slow. Right? But there you have it, fun mnemonic devices there. Before we go down any further, I always point out this little discoloration on the rock in front of me. There's a little bit of damage there, a little bit of algae growth. And that's not from people touching the rock right there, it's just from the light being pointed there a few hours a day. That gives you an idea about how sensitive things are down here. And then also there's that little white insulator. There's one on the wall behind you guys up there as well. And that's from that old 1950s lighting system. They just decided that it would cause too much damage to rip those stakes out of the wall, so they just kept them in there. And we'll see those as we go as well. So with that, let's head on down to the next part. Be careful on the stairs, they might be a little slick.
Grab the handrails.
Yeah, lose all the strength as soon as you go on the ground and your feet. Before I first got those shoes instead of tennis shoes.
And we don't have to stand quite single file yet, so feel free to move up here closer to the railing so you can get a better look, and we can make some more room for the people behind us. Thank you. That was very brave of you. Most times there's a little bubble that forms right here for no reason at all. And you squashed it. Yeah, I liked it. So as we walk down the stairs, you might have seen that slick rock wall off to your left. It kind of looked like someone dumped a bunch of paint down it. And that's an example of flowstone. That's another type of cave formation. That's just where the water's flowing over the stone and leaving behind all that calcite. Gives it that shiny look. Now these two in front of us, these are also examples of flowstone. Sometimes they kind of make shapes like this and they're fun to look at. But the one thing you'll notice is these are a lot less shiny than the one behind us, and that's because they've been severely damaged over the years. People touching them, breaking pieces off, sort of climbing up and down them. And so these are considered dead at this point, which means they're no longer growing. And what happens is too much oil from our hands gets on these, and then the water can no longer flow over the formations, and so it's no longer depositing any more calcite. And so that's kind of why they stopped growing. But they're still kind of fun to look at. This one here, I think it looks like a Christmas tree out of a Dr. Seuss book. But also I had an 80-year-old man tell me that this was his arthritic vertebrae. So we'll have that to look forward to one day, I suppose. But the parks, we call it the zoo because there's a bunch of different animal shapes in here. It's kind of fun to point them out, see what people see. And so let's start up at the top. What do we see up here, maybe? Walrus, manatee, some sort of marine mammal. Now, someone told me once that this was his toe, and I told him that you should probably go see a doctor. Right? Something going on there. What about this one here?
Turtle.
Some people say fish. Was that a turtle? Yeah. This one here is pretty interesting. This is pretty ambiguous. I've heard just about everything from saber-toothed tiger to walrus to lion to jellyfish to pumpkin to praying mantis to grasshopper to woolly dog, a monkey. That's one that I haven't heard of before. Like maybe a big orangutan with those big face pads. What else? Yeah, I said pretty much everything, didn't I?
Covered quite a bit.
This one here, people say alligator, sometimes turtle, sometimes tiger. I think it depends on the angle that you're looking at it from.
Looks like a shroom.
This one here,
No, the one above.
this one looks like a shroom.
Yeah.
I used to always say that this one looks like a mushroom
too.
or a piece of broccoli.
Yeah.
Some people tell me it looks like an elephant to them. But once, the best one I ever heard, it was this 7-year-old boy, and he told me that this was the face of Predator. Okay? I think maybe he was a little young to be watching the Predator movies. It was probably haunting his dreams, that's why he saw it. But now every time I look at it, that's what I see, it's the Predator. And then the bottom, like I have a lot of trouble with the bottom, so I usually just say cauliflower. It's hard to know what to do with cauliflower. It usually stays in your fridge a little too long, starts changing colors, so that's just a bunch of cauliflower at the bottom. Now, I don't know how well you guys know your U.S. presidents, but if you look back up the stairs, you might see Richard Nixon up here.
Oh, wow.
Every president dreams of being carved in stone. They're probably thinking Mount Rushmore most of the time, but I guess, you know, Nixon got Gardner Cave instead. There you have it. And this next one, I've heard it called the pipe organ before, but I just think it looks like melted wax or something. But the thing you really notice about this next one is all the damage done to the front. This was like a popular spot for people to come and break off a piece of rock for a souvenir. But where it's broken, you can really see all that white crystalline calcite on the inside. And that gives you a good idea about what both of these would have looked like before they got so damaged. Read a lot of old descriptions of these, and apparently they were pretty impressive. They would kind of put candles in and sort of light them up like chandeliers, so it would have been a fun time to come down here in the early 20th century to check things out. But another cool thing about limestone is that it has translucent properties, and so I can actually shine my flashlight through the corner here, and you can see it on the other side. If you guys in the front can't see, that light kind of pokes through the other side, and you can see it shining through at the bottom there. And then you guys stand right in front of this platform here. Don't know if you guys have a flashlight. Kind of look on the side of the wall, you can see where it's broken off, you can see all that crystal on the inside as you go. And just for spacing, maybe some of you can come up and stand next to me if your footing's okay, and we can fit some more people kind of into this little area. Keep coming. Good, good. So this wall behind us, this is kind of the big graffiti wall where people have signed their names over the years. Looks like Mike's been here a few times, John, Jim. But I always like to point out these two creatures in the middle. I'm not exactly sure what they're supposed to be, but most people tell me they're cat people. I didn't realize such a thing existed. But I just I don't know, I think maybe they're just humans with big ears or horns. But I like to think in a couple thousand years, someone might be giving this tour and they'll say, here are the ancient gods of the cave, Mike and Bill, ancient gods of the 20th century. We all know that if something stays on a cave wall long enough, it becomes art or it becomes sacred, so there you have it. I like to think that maybe those buffalo that were carved into the French caves, it was just some caveman delinquent, right? Tagging his gang signs. But anyway, over here, this is sort of evidence of the only creature that really lives in here. This is a wood rat nest. And you probably know them better as pack rats. I think they become a pack rat once they get into your shed. But they, they're the only things that live in here. They're very shy, so they kind of scurry away as soon as the lights come on. But if you know anything about these things, you know that they like to collect things from our houses and our sheds and sort of gather them up, decorate their nests with them. We're constantly pulling out little trinkets and stuff, property tape, old cigarette butts. I think that cigarette butts are kind of like garden gnomes to them. They're sort of decorating their lawn with them. And so those are kind of the only things. And, look them up on the internet sometime. They're kind of cute. They got big ears. They sort of hop around like kangaroos. They got furry tails. Little interesting creatures. They smell and they're disgusting, but they are kind of cute. So back to the rocks, back to the thing we're all here for. Back up on the ceiling, we'll see our first good example of a stalactite hanging down. And people have all sorts of fun with the shape of this one. Most people will say turkey or chicken right off the back because of that little drumstick on the side. Other people say corn. Someone was hungry when they came through here the first time, I think. But other people will see like a dragon head or maybe a dinosaur or a whale. Sometimes I see the worm from the Tremors movie. But the big thing that I always see, the first thing that I saw when I saw this was the pod from the Alien movies. Yep. And if you've ever seen that movie, you know that's just one more reason not to touch anything in here. That never works out good. And so we're going to be kind of single file from here on out. So some of you in the back may not be able to see exactly what I'm talking about, but as you get a little closer, you can check things out. As you guys come down here, be sure to look up at the ceiling on this side of the wall, and you're going to see a whole lot of calcite buildup. All of these formations, a lot of little like tendrils and tentacles, kind of looks like squid up there, maybe dreadlocks. And if you look down, we have this active lobe right in front of us. Sort of looks like a mushroom that you would see on a tree. But it's sort of dripping. You can kind of see it growing right before our eyes. And where it's dripping, you can look down on the floor and see its companion stalagmite there growing up from the ground as well. And so if that water stays and drips like that for the next like 50 to 70,000 years, those two might actually grow together and form a column someday, which would be kind of cool. But of course, that's a really long time from now. There's no guarantee that the water will stay in the same place. If you look behind you over on this side of the railing, you'll see a bunch of dried up fried egg looking things. And those were stalagmites that were starting to grow, but they're sort of evidence that the water was kind of dripping on this side at one point, and then it sort of shifted over to the other side, and all those just kind of dried up, and that's as far as they ever got. We call those the green eggs and bacon because there's a slab of bacon right next to it. The bacon doesn't look too good to eat because it's covered in rat poop. But I like to pretend like it's peppered bacon, looking at seasoning on there. So hopefully I didn't cook the bacon for you. Yeah, that's what I always fall back on.
Oh, there's no railing there.
No.
Oh my land. Oh my gosh.
There's where the whiskey is.
Does anyone know how far back that little family?
Yes. So I'm told now that's a dried up stream channel. That's just another spot where the water came through and sort of joined up with the main cave. And I'm told that goes back about 50 feet or so. But once you get around the corner, it gets very, very tight. You have to kind of wedge yourself in between some rocks to get anywhere. And so the guy that I was talking to who explored a little back there, he said that he was kind of at a tight spot where he was shimmying along on his stomach. And that's about the time that the pack rat started to run back and forth across his legs. And so he, of course, jumped up, sort of hit his head, and he decided that was the end of his cave exploring days. So there you have it. But I'm guessing that's where the whiskey bottle is, right? But behind us, we see a couple things also. There's like a big column on the side here. Misbehaving children. It never does, though. And then up at the ceiling, you can see this inverted channel that sort of runs the length of the cave, that upside down canyon on the ceiling. And there's a couple different theories for what that is. Some people think that that's the original stream channel that cut the cave, just the first place where the water came through. And other people think that during the Ice Age, when this latitude is sort of covered in ice, that this cave fills up with debris and aggregate and all sorts of stuff all the way to the ceiling. And then when those glaciers finally melt, there's a lot of water coming through here at once. With nowhere to go, it sort of cut that channel on the top there. There's a little bit of evidence for each theory, and they're pretty unsettled. Geologists are still not sure what it actually is. I had a group of them in here a few weeks ago. They were sort of duking it out between the theories, and so still very much unsettled. But there is some evidence that there was a lot of water coming through here at once. There's some hydraulic scarring, things like that. You can see some little holes on the wall here. That's sort of evidence of little eddies from big, lots of turbulent water. But yeah, I just kind of like to throw both those out, give you something to think about. And then this big one next to me, this is a live flowstone, unlike the ones that we saw up at the top. It's so big and bulbous, and you can see the water sort of flowing down this side, working its way out towards the platform. And this might be my favorite cave formation. I'm not exactly sure why, but it's probably because it reminds me of so many different things. And so most people look at this, they call it Jabba the Hutt because Star Wars is so popular. I'm more of a Dune fan. I see Baron Harkonnen suspended above us when I look at this. But, you might also see Pizza the Hutt if you're a Mel Brooks fan. You might see Eric Cartman. You might see the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man from Ghostbusters. You might see the Buddha. But recently, I've had to watch a lot of old DVDs to entertain myself. There's not a lot of streaming availability out here with the internet the way it is, so I'm working my way through all the DVDs from my childhood. And I've been recently watching some old Chris Farley movies, so I'm thinking Chris Farley nowadays. But I'm sure you all can think of something or someone that you can sort of transpose onto that.
Yeah, it does. It's surprising.
You dripped on? Mentioned that the water's slightly acidic. Probably not acidic enough to pour a hole through your sweater. But it's supposed to be good luck. It's called a cave kiss. It's supposed to make a wish to happen. In all honesty, none of my wishes have come true yet. Been dripped on many times. So I'll probably keep trying.
When I was sitting on the tractor, and I was all wrapped up in coat, white coat into that, and said, "You look like Buddha."
We about caught up in the back, or do we got to move down a little further?
We're back here.
All right.
So are we supposed to squeeze together, is that what you're saying?
Yes.
We'll squeeze in there?
At every point, you should squeeze together like pack rats.
No.
All right, so the pools below us, these are called Rimstone Pools. These are caused by the water that sort of digs out these basins over time. And then they fill up, and the ripples kind of carry calcite out to the edge and build up the walls a little bit. These are almost dried out. There's a little bit of water in this middle one here. But they dry out over time because limestone is porous, and so it sort of drains out the bottom. But if you come here in the late spring, in like late May or early June, that's sort of the best time to come to the cave because all of these are pretty much full all the way up. So that's a pretty cool sight to see.
So it's cyclical?
Yes, usually by August they're completely dry every year. I think we might last a little longer this year because we had so much rain. I mean, halfway through June they were about halfway full, and we had all those storms, and it takes about 3 days for the water to work its way through, but then they always kind of filled up again.
That's cool.
So yeah, but it will get dry eventually this summer. But when they're full like this, most people notice how clear the water is. People are always asking me if they can drink the water. I say probably not. I don't know if that's the real answer, but probably not seems like the appropriate thing to say. And you know, scientists were kind of curious as to where the water drained at one point. So they put some coloring dye in there and they were able to follow it. And they found out that it was discharging right about where Ed's shack was all those years ago. And so it was likely his drinking water. And poor Ed, he suffered from stomach ulcers. It might have had something to do with the cave water that he was drinking all the time. But I think that the moonshine probably had something more to do with it. Yeah, that stuff's like 200 proof. You gotta be careful. Another cool thing you can see as you walk down this stretch is there's a bunch of very small stalactites starting to grow on this back shelf. And these are really interesting because at this point we call them cave straws. And that's because if you look very, very closely at some of the tips, you'll notice that they're hollow on the inside. And so that's kind of interesting. The way that these form is they'll start as a single droplet of water on the ceiling. All of that calcite sort of gravitates to the outside of the droplet, and then it leaves behind a ring when it finally drips away. And then that ring slowly grows into a tube, and you got yourself a cave straw. Now at this stage in their development, these things are the fastest growing things in the cave. They grow about 1 inch per 100 years, so we're talking blazing fast. Most things I think grow about 1 cubic centimeter per 100 years, so this is a lot faster. But we're still talking about like 400 or 500 years of growth on some of these bigger ones. You'll even see some little 1-inchers on this broken stalactite. So that tells me that was broken about 100 years ago or so. And then you can also see these little dots on the floor. Those are the stalagmites starting to grow as well. All of them much older than we probably ever will be.
Really going down. That's cool.
All those little things go to the water.
That's so incredible.
Yes, this is the pride and joy of the cave here. So I mentioned this type of formation before briefly, but this is called a column. This is where a stalagmite and a stalactite have grown together over the years. And so the water's been very consistent in this location, or it's been flowing very heavily. And this is the largest limestone formation in the state of Washington. It's one of the biggest in the Northwest. There's a couple bigger in southern Idaho and southeast Oregon, but this is the biggest in the Evergreen State, so we're all very proud of it here. And there's a couple cool things that you can check out as you walk by. First of all, if you shine your light on here, the first thing that you'll notice is there's a bunch of like bugs that have been stuck in here over the years. Some flies and mosquitoes. The occasional worm is desperately trying to escape. You'll even find a little spider on the base if you want to try and find him as well. But these things kind of fly into the column, they get weighed down by that mineral content, and then slowly the calcite flows over them and entombs them forever. But this always reminds me of Jurassic Park, right? Maybe Michael Crichton took a cave tour before he wrote those books. But, you know, I'm sure that we could resurrect man-eating lizards from the past if we wanted to, but they made like 6 movies about why that's a bad idea. So if I ever see a scientist scraping off a mosquito, I'll be sure to take them out before they reach the world above. Now the other cool thing that you can check out is there's a couple signatures on the side here. That's a little bit of a bummer, a little bit of vandalism on the beautiful column. But there is a really interesting signature on the bottom. This is from an old school teacher back in the day. And her name was Pearl, and she came by in about August of 1912 and signed her name. So we're talking about almost 110 years ago, coming up next month. And that's really, really impressive when you get to thinking about it. Back then, there was no platforms or stairs or artificial lighting in here. When you're way back up, just look underneath you and imagine what it's like to climb up this stuff. And imagine that there's like, you know, a bunch of mud on the ground as well. It was very, very difficult to get this far down into the cave. So most people would go up to that upper chamber and just break off a piece of rock and then hightail it out of there. But not Pearl. She had like enough curiosity and sense of adventure to make it all the way down here to the lower part of the cave and leave her name behind. And in 1912, she probably didn't wear a skirt. So I'm very impressed by that. I tip my cap to Pearl. And I tell people go easy on her. Like it's only vandalism if it's less than 100 years old. But once you reach that century mark, it's just sort of history at that point. So there you have it. That's right. We should be able to fit everyone down here. This is it.
That's cool.
See where you live in the group.
Yep.
Would you like to see?
Alright, so I have a little bit of conflicting information about how far in from the entrance we are, but the best surveys that I've seen say that we're about 300 feet in and 100 feet underground at this point. And the entire cave, though, is 1,100 feet long, and you're at about 260 feet underground when you finally reach the bottom. Those are not the numbers on the brochure. I have no idea where they got those numbers. I'm just going off the actual surveys that I've seen. The reason why the tour ends here is because after that gate down there gets very, very narrow, you actually have to slide down head first down some very steep, light rocks to get to the bottom. And the reason you go head first is so your clothes don't bunch up. It's like Cave Exploring 101. So if you ever find yourself in a mysterious cave, you want to know where some passageway goes, just be sure to dive in head first. That's how the pros do it.
Are you done?
I have not yet. First chance I get, I will go down there. I'm waiting for someone who knows what the heck they're doing. But I have spoken to people who have been down at the bottom. People have come on the tour who are sort of kids or teenagers in the 1960s, and they went down there with their parents kind of before the tours were instituted. And they say that, yeah, it's very narrow, you're going down head first, and then it sort of widens out again after the narrows. There's a large chamber at the bottom, and there's some cool stuff to see down there. After the large chamber, there's like a couple other passageways that go on, but they're very small, a little too small to explore. So we're not really sure where those go. We assume they're kind of working their way down to the river, because we know the water's draining out that direction. But you just kind of gotta use your imagination to guess what's down there. I like to imagine a lost civilization of pack rats who have mastered philosophy and poetry.
Flying white pack rats.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
They're down there, I'm sure.
The tube is electrical conduit. I think we have some more lighting down there. We do have like scientists come here for surveys and stuff. But I'm not sure. I've got a couple switches back here, but I'm afraid to play with all of them because I don't know what they do. I'm afraid one might jettison this platform in space. You never know. Yeah. But speaking of pack rats, if you look behind me, you're going to see kind of the mother of all pack rat nests. And that's actually less of a nest and it's more of just a debris pile. These things are pretty interesting. They call them middens. And the cool thing about these is they can be maintained by generations of pack rats for tens of thousands of years. So I had one colleague in the National Park Service, she came across one. She said the oldest one she ever saw was dated to about 70,000 years old. And that's mind-blowing. These things are so old that climate scientists can use them to sort of study how the climate's changed over long periods of time, go in there and sort of analyze the pollen, the seeds and leaves that they find, see what different kind of plant species might have grown in the past, that sort of things. And that's crazy to me. I always think of them drilling into ice, but apparently debris piles left behind by rats can also like serve the same purpose. And these things are very, very active in the park. My first week here, I had a maintenance guy leave a pair of gloves out on a picnic table, and about a day later, we found them all the way down. Yeah, their scouting missions are both comprehensive and far-reaching. And they know a good pair of gloves when they see one. And so this is the fun part of the tour. All this talk about pack rats, you're probably wondering what it's like to be one. So I'm going to do you that favor and just shut off the lights, plunge us all into darkness, give us an idea about what it's like. So, if you could, try and dim any personal devices you have, put your phones in your pocket, that sort of thing, turn your headlamps off. Your jacket glows, that's going to be a tough one. Yeah. So, a couple rules. Well, one main rule, just please keep your hands to yourself when the lights go off. Try not to do anything too embarrassing, because I will turn the lights back on with no warning whatsoever, and you'll just look like a fool. All right, if everyone's ready, I'm going to go ahead and turn them off now.
I see a red light.
There's a couple.
Blinking cameras.
We got a couple cameras in here. That's okay. We're still kind of getting the picture. This is still dark, very dark, right? Usually, if it's completely dark, you can kind of put your hand in front of your face, and you will not be able to see it one bit. You're probably wondering what it's like how do the pack rats find their way around in here? Most people assume they have night vision. That's not the case. Other people assume they have very good hearing, almost like a bat. Also not the case. What they do is they rely on their sense of smell, and to help themselves out, what they do is they pee all over their furry tails and leave little trails of urine in and out of the cave that they can smell. Yes, this is like the smelliest version of Hansel and Gretel, leaving behind stinky little breadcrumbs to smell. I'm both repulsed and impressed.
They also have pretty good whiskers, don't they?
Whiskers, I don't know what role the whiskers play. All I've read about is they're peeing on the floor and smelling their way in and out.
Okay.
So, this is how the first people in the cave would have saw it. This is how Ed would have made his way through the first time. This is how Pearl would have come down. And it's much different from the lighted tour that we just took. You might be assuming they had torches and lanterns, and they did, but mostly the stories that I've read talk about people down here with candles or matches, at the very least. I read one story about a guy in the 60s who had a bit to drink that day, and he decided that one box of matches was enough to get him down to the bottom. He was absolutely right. That got him all the way down. but of course not back up. It did not. So he ran out, and he claimed it took him about 24 hours or like a full day to blindly feel his way back up. And you can just imagine the disorientation. I mean, you might assume that it's easy to tell when you're going up as opposed to when you're going down, but when your vision's taken away, that's really how we are used to interacting with reality, so it gets very hard to keep track of where you are. I like to imagine, I mentioned he had a couple drinks that day, I like to imagine that last match burned down to his fingertip, and he became the most sober he'd ever been in his life.
Don't burn your fingers.
Oh, don't worry, I'm a pro with these props. One more cool thing I gotta show you is calcite has a cool effect when it's exposed to ultraviolet light. Yeah. This is where we break out the glow sticks and dance music. Have a little party. That's right. So, and yeah, feel free to take pictures. They work a little better without the flash at this point. But the effect that we're seeing here is called fluorescence. This is an ultraviolet light, and ultraviolet wavelengths are very, very small, so small they're actually invisible to the human eye. That purple light that you see is some visible light that's included in the flashlight. But all the glowing stuff is actually the calcite. And so what's happening is the ultraviolet goes into the mineral, it excites the electrons in there, gets them jumping around and vibrating, and that causes them to emit light. So that's the glow that we're seeing.
Can you shine it on the big structure?
Oh, that's a good question. That's my grand finale. I'm going to have you hold my flashlight for me for this next part. I like to keep my flashlight behind because people are a little nervous that I'm going to abandon them. Why don't you two on the stairs come down to the platform for this next part. We got plenty of room. Don't worry. Just get in here, let you fill in. Like me, there. Just come down to the platform here. There's some space for you right here next to me. Yeah.
All right, I got it.
All right, very good. So, what I can do is I can walk up to this thing and I can get very, very close to it, and I'll juice it up a bit with my light, and then I'll start moving it around in a circle like this.
Ooh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
So that's pretty cool. It's like I'm painting on the rock with my light. And after a few times around, I can just take it away. Yeah, it glows like that for 4 or 5 seconds. And so I've been working on my artistic abilities, so bear with me. I'll try and do a little masterpiece for you. Do this.
No eyes.
Can you make a smiley face?
That's my best impression of Pearl. I'm getting better.
So why does it do that?
So that is called phosphorescence, kind of like fluorescence. And what's happening there is the electrons stay excited even after you take the source of radiation away. It just takes a little while for those electrons to kind of settle back into their original orbit. So that's kind of what's going on there. I can give you a little bit of a closer look at these little nubbies here.
Wow.
So you guys came here expecting some history and some geology, and then I shoved some chemistry and physics down your throat as well. So you got the full tour.
If you shine your flashlight from the other side, would we be able to see?
You know, I've never tried before. Let's just go ahead and do a little experiment here, if you guys have enough patience. I don't think we'll be able to see it, but you guys tell me. All right, I got it on there.
Nope.
Nothing? What if I put it in this hole down here? Nothing?
No.
Yeah.
Now you know.
What about a regular light?
Or turn off.
I think I would need a giant UV light to do that. But if it was thin enough, we saw how the light kind of went through it. But that was a very thin piece of limestone that I was shining through up there, and that's a big guy up there. So. At the very end, I'm always just a little relieved when the lights come back on. You never know, they might not someday. I'll tell everyone to panic. Temperature's still at 39. But yeah, so that's the end of the formal tour. At this point, you can take your time on the way back out, take as many pictures as you want, get a closer look at anything you're interested in. I usually stay towards the back. If you have any questions, I'll try and answer them. But I'll also make sure no children get left behind. But yeah, thank you all for coming out today. I hope you enjoyed yourself, and I hope you learned something about the cave.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I want to look down that hole.
I'm gonna hold on.
Oh.
Yeah, yeah, I'm a little slower. Little weeble wobbling. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes.
Can I get a picture of the thermometer?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
The what?
He's got a.
Oh, he does have a thermometer.
There's a couple throughout. There's one up there by the dry stream bed channel.
I have to prove why I'm in winter gear on a hot summer day.
Wow. I actually come in here and I paint those thermometers at 39 degrees, so I'm never contradicted.
Thank you very much for the tour.
You're
That was
welcome.
really
Thank you.
nice.
Underground temperature was always around 50 something.
So, I don't know enough about thermal dynamics to really explain why it stays 39. All I know is that in places like this, when the temperature reaches equilibrium, it takes a lot of energy to move it off that. So that's kind of why it stays constant. Now, the 39 degrees, not exactly sure why it stays there, why it's so cool.
Because they need that mosquitoes.
Well, that's 49 degrees. Yeah, you're right. We're pretty far from the 39 parallel right now.
Yeah.
Just kind of has a cactus texture to it.
Very smiling. My phone does not take good indoor pictures, so.
We're not indoors, there's no doors.
Indoors.
That is an awesome shot. You know why?
I was gonna give them my best.
Not really. That was a mammoth cave. That was very impressive. Yeah. Probably the most impressive limestone cave, one of in the world.
I do.
So, right there, that's the same thing as the Rimstone Pools. What happens is water flows down and some of those dams start to form, and then they'll sort of get burrowed out. But the gradient is just a lot steeper in this area, so they're much smaller. The Rimstone Pools, yeah, that's one thing I'll go on. I think maybe the picture of Carl had.
Yeah.
So where's the I missed Carl, where? Not yet.
Maybe, yeah, maybe now.
That is a huge gallery.
Where's Carl?
You guys want to see pearls today? It's all the way back here at the bottom of this little lake right here. If you want to check it out.
Oh my goodness, Jocelyn.
Actually, right there at the bottom, you have light and you kind of see the T and the A and the August. But it's getting pretty old and the outside's definitely blown over there. It's starting to get some 1912. So I had a lot of trouble finding 1912, but it wasn't always so fading like that. Like the 50s and
How did you get a signal?
T-Mobile 5G it doesn't work anywhere else but in a cave.
So, it's a weird question, but some of these places, there's the white deposit, and then there's the clear water pools. What's this one?
So, say that again, there's a
Spots are.
those spots are stalagmites
Yeah.
starting to grow.
That's the water falling down, right? So
Yeah.
what is it on the side there, but pool?
Oh, the pool there, I see what you're saying. So it depends on how strong the rock is. Maybe there's a little bit of like slate underneath that, or maybe granite or something.
outside quickly up to the edge. You can pile out there.
Oh, okay, so that's it, same stuff, it's just that calcite is rolling to the edge.
This is constant,
Yes.
constant movement to
Yeah.
wherever it goes out.
They bring some of this off on purpose.
Yes, so I was told that like you can make noises like drag or lay by across there's growth up it's off, break off something. People were very destructive in the early 20th century.
And I'm back
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I might have gotten small cuts and died of infection.
So, how does the water know it can't flow over a certain rock?
So you ever heard the expression water and oil don't mix?
Yeah, so
So it
it
doesn't
just
have to
repels
go, it just doesn't
it.
go over
It just
oil.
repels it.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, right there?
Do you say like there's a road around here?
Yeah, and the whole like goes down and over. You guys, what day you said? Usually, there's a lot of examples back here where you can see really cool crystals.
Coming back to that marijuana smell. Must be the pack rats. So that's how they keep people out. They actually lock the door. Yeah, that's pretty beefy. Daylight. Alright, there you are, sweetheart.
Oh my gosh.
You made it. Oh, there's another cavern that way.
That was
That's pretty epic.
incredible.
Yeah. Wow, warming up fast. That's pretty amazing. All right. One cave tour over, and you survived.
Oh my.